Okay, so this is the video to help you get through the last assignment about querying by attributes and geography. After you found it, the map, you were supposed to save as and put your name there instead of mine. And of course, we're going to start out looking at just the counties. And of course, we have 95 counties in Tennessee. Just showing you that underneath each layer you've got these different options. In the new version of Map Viewer, these are the options that show up in that right panel. So here you can see you've got our 95 counties with lots and lots of different data. You can sort them. You can do some statistics and find out the mean and the median and the standard deviation. So you can do a lot of things in the table. We really haven't done too much in the table other than I've had to sort a few times just to find like the biggest something or other. I think for one of the last assignments it was to find the watershed that had the greatest amount of stream miles. But you can change how many columns you see in a table, and some of these tables are like really wide. So you could just come through and, select the specific attributes that you want to show. In this case, since we're doing population and that farm size one, which there's so many to go through, it's sometimes hard to find the right one you're looking for. There we go, number of farms, boom. And 17 means it comes from the 2017 census data from the Ag Census. And you can also filter, which takes you to the same filter that you get to when you click the filter button under the layer. So that's another way of getting to the filter. You can actually add a field in a table as long as you have editing privileges, which I usually give you for most layers. So you can add, dates in or integers, different numbers, like you could calculate the population per square mile or something like that if you wanted to. So don't, forget that you can actually create new fields in the table rather than going back to the item details and doing it that way. So in this case, we're going to filter for the population has to be under 20,000. And it used to be you actually couldn't put in a comma, you'd get an error. But now the system's smart enough to know that you just mean 2000 and not 20,000. And so you can see if you just do that, you come up with 28 features because you've only put in one part of the selection. The second one is finding out which ones have quite a few farms. So that's where you find the number of farms. As I said, I always had a hard time scrolling through to find the right one. Even though they're in alphabetical order, it shouldn't have been that hard. But this time you want them to be at least 300 farms. And then you can either apply the filter or you can apply the filter and zoom to. But in this case, because the counties are spread out all over the state, it wouldn't matter. This is how you change it from being like and to or. So if it match all of the expressions, it's the same as saying and. It has to meet both criteria. So this is how you end up with the 20 counties that are kind of spread across the state that have low population but have quite a few farms. And this is kind of our target audience for our elementary school programs. And this is the step where I asked you to make a copy of the county layers. And I'm going to rename it Target Counties. Now, once again, this is not using any tools. This was just using the filter. And I'm going to go ahead and remove the filter from the original county layer. And that was in step 1.5. So now you can kind of toggle between the two and you see you've got the one with they're basically pulling from the same data, but one doesn't have a filter and one has the filter on it. So now we're actually going to do using the tool to make an actual permanent feature layer out there in your content area that has them filtered for the 20 counties. So that way, if anybody ever wanted these 20 counties to use in a different project, you could let them use it and they'd already be filtered. So you have to go through the whole thing again. The population is less than 20,000, and the number of farms is at least 300. A little bit different than using the filter, but basically once you get into adding the expression, they're very, very similar. There we go. It's at least 300. Okay, and then the and the or are what switches between whether you're going to have both things being required or just one or the other. They have to meet either one or the other. In this case, we want them to meet both expressions. And I'm going to go ahead and give it the result layer name with my initials at the end to make it unique. And I happen to like putting stuff in folders. So now this is important because this is where I think some of you might have messed up. You might have been zoomed in on your map. And if you say use current map extend, it only does the analysis for what you can see in your view. Now, if you turn it off and your layers are just the right size, that's perfectly fine, and you won't have that problem of the analysis being restricted to what just the view you have in your map if you're zoomed in. So, and you know, in this case, it's the same because the credit usage is exactly the same. Now, where this wouldn't work is if you had the whole US in the county database. If you didn't say use the current extent and you didn't have Tennessee selected, it would try to do the analysis for the entire country, and that would probably use up like hundreds of your credits. I'll always try to keep the data set small and focused so that you won't run into that problem. But it's best to just always keep it where you're just doing the current extent. So now you can see that they're basically the same. The one I did with the filter and the one I did with the spatial analysis tool are basically the same. So now in my public schools, we see we have 1,891 altogether for Tennessee. And you can look at, when you look at their names, you see a bunch of them have the word elementary in it. So I'm going to go in and filter. Now, I could have also done this with the tool, with the spatial tool, and then I would have ended up with a permanent layer out there that would be just the schools I was interested in, but I'm just using a filter. And I can actually type the word in elementary with the small letters, big letters, caps, no caps. It shouldn't make any difference. And you just want to have the word contain elementary. We're not probably getting every school because there's probably some elementary schools that don't have the word elementary in them, but we're probably getting most of them this way. So then we should end up with fewer schools out of the 1,800 plus that we had before. Now we end up with like, I think it's 913 or something schools that meet the criteria for having elementary in their name. And now we want to find out which ones are in those 20 target counties. And there's probably a couple different ways you can do this in terms of which find criteria you use, which spatial find tool or query by geography tool that you use. So we'll do two different ones here, and just to show you that either one gets you to the same place. You do always make sure you start your analysis with the layer that you want to end up with. So we want to end up with schools that are in those counties. So you have to start the analysis tool with schools. And you can see there's a bunch of different choices here for your spatial queries. So we're going to try intersect first, which just means they can be within the county or touching the line of the county. And the chances of a school actually being exactly on the county line is probably pretty slim. So my guess is that either using this or it is completely within will probably give you the same results. And going ahead and naming it here, but I'm going to name this also by the type of spatial query that I use, just so I can show you the difference. So in this case, I use the intersect tool, and I know that because I can look up in my window and see the word intersects. So I'm going to type in intersect, and then I'll put my initials, although it's probably unique enough without my initials, in the right folder, making sure I'm using the current map extent, although as long as I'm not zoomed in, not a problem. And boom, there they are. Of course, my analysis took a little bit longer than this. I just made the recording program pause. And you can see there's 49 of them when we use the intersect query tool, the query by a geography tool, the intersect, which means anywhere in or touching the other feature. So the points have to be in or touching the polygon counties. So now we're going to run the tool again, but this time we'll use one of the other spatial query tools. So remember, you have to go over there, and this time instead of intersects, we're going to use that they're completely within. So if any of them happen to be touching like exactly on the line of the county, they wouldn't get picked. But in this case, we don't happen to have any school that is exactly on the county line. So we're going to go ahead and name this by the name of the tool that I'm using, which is completely within. And once again, I probably didn't have to put my initials because it's probably pretty unique. And making sure I'm in the right extent, that I'm not zoomed in, so I'm getting the whole state of Tennessee. And I run my analysis, and of course I skip through the waiting for it to finish. But we basically end up with the same schools. If you click back and forth, you don't see any different schools being there. And then if you check the number, you'll see it's the exact same number of schools. So we've got 49 schools again. So in this case, using either intersect or completely within, both gave you the same results. May not always be the case, but in this case, it was fine. And now I'm going to rename these so I start to make my layers have a little bit more sense and not have my initials everywhere. Okay, so then we're going to find all the schools that are close to the wild trout streams. Now, actually, I could have zoomed in over here, and this is when I think folks got in trouble, is they left it zoomed here when they started to do their last analyses, and they truncated their analyses for the last two steps of the map. So do be careful that if you want for the whole state, you have to make sure the whole state is showing up in your map view. So in this case, this is pretty straightforward. We're just looking at all those schools that we've selected already for elementary. They still have the filter on them, but now we're finding the ones that are within a distance of 10 miles of one of those trout streams. Now, some folks picked nearest to. I didn't take off credit for that, but I do say specifically that they're within 10 miles of a trout stream. And once again, you got to make sure you start with the analysis with schools. It needs to be the layer up at the top because you want to end up with schools. So this is our Trout Elementary Schools. And I'll go ahead and run this analysis, and in this case, if I could have used current map extent, and I could have zoomed in as long as all the trout streams and all the schools were in the view, the schools that are close to the trout streams. But it's better just to do everything from the whole state view, and that way you don't ever have to worry about truncating your analyses by mistake. So you should have ended up with 76 schools. And it makes sense that they're running kind of up and down along the Appalachian Mountains there, because that's where the wild trout streams are. Okay, so now we are going to move on to finding the boat access areas that are launchable for all vessels. So it can't be the ones that are just up to 17 feet or something. It had to be the one that said actually all vessels, meaning that even the bigger boats can launch from there. And has to be within 10 miles of the freeway system. So it means we're going to have two expressions, and it's going to have to be and because they have to meet both criteria. So once again, you got to start with the right layer. We want to end up with boating access areas, so we have to start with boating access areas. We want them to be launchable for all vessels. So that was just a plain old query by attribute. And now we're doing a query by location. We want it within 10 miles of the freeway system. And they do have to be and because you want them to meet both criteria. And this is where I have to rename it properly. And you want to use the current extent because you want to have it for the whole state. You don't want to truncate it. And then you end up with your launchable boat access. So a lot of folks miss the all vessel option here. They just did the distance from the interstate. So you should have ended up with, make sure I've got the right number here, 75. 75 boat access. And now we've got our Huck 8s, which are the larger watersheds like Watts Bar. And we want to find out which ones have both a boat access and fishing access, because then we can really gear towards those counties for our cleanup proposals, because those are areas that tend to get kind of messy with litter and fish guts and things like that. So we need some sort of a cleanup plan if they've got both. I mean, probably if they have either one, you should, but definitely if you get at least one of each, you should have a plan for sure. So once again, this is going to be connected by and this is where some of you, for some reason, changed it to or. And I wasn't sure, and that's how you ended up with 45 Huck 8s instead of the 30 Huck 8s that you should have ended up with. So it shouldn't have been or, it should have been and. And then name the resultant layer appropriately. So these are our Huck 8s with boat and fishing. And remember, you had to start with the Huck 8 in the analysis because you want to end up with Huck 8s, but a subset of all the Huck 8s. I think there were 60 of them. So there we go. And boom. So you can see all these other ones, they might have had one or the other. They might have had boat access or fishing access, but they didn't have one of each, or at least one of each. Of course, some of them might have had more than one of each. So these would be your target Hucks that you would want to really make sure you had some sort of a clean up campaign going on. And so now I'm just doing a little bit of cleaning up of my table of contents, getting rid of my initials and putting spaces in and stuff. So I didn't actually take off any credit. The only credit I think I took off is if you didn't share the short URL. I think I took off a point or something if you didn't do that, because it's just good practice to use short URLs and not give somebody some, 2-line URL or something like that. So just as I'm wrapping this up here, I'll just say that, selections by attributes and by geography are just super important. And hopefully you notice that here, how powerful they are, especially when you start combining them, where you can have, multiple selections and then concatenating them with ors or with ands, and they can get pretty complex sometimes. Sometimes I have to make sure I keep mine simple so I don't kind of get all confused and not have too many queries going on at the same time. And I didn't fuss at you if you didn't rename the ones at the end. So there you go.